Okay, I think we can get going. We've got a good group to start with. Thank you all for joining the call and for your interest in the use of wild species in East Africa. My name is Frank Voorhees, and I'm the director of the African Wildlife Institute at Stellenbosch University. And my role in today's session is very limited. My role is to introduce Charles Karanga, who is going to facilitate the session. Charles has been with IUCN for quite a number of years and now is at headquarters running the Global Nature-Based Solutions Program. We talk wildlife economy. Charles talks nature-based solutions. There's an overlap, and one of the overlaps is on fuelwood, and the topic of this discussion in charcoal, the harvesting of wild species for fuel. So I've also had the fortune of having Charles as a student at the African Leadership University. He has a conservation MBA, which makes him a really interesting character in the space, combining business and biodiversity. Charles, I'll shut up and turn it over to you. Enjoy the session, everybody.
Thank you, Francis, for the opportunity to also facilitate this session. Welcome, everyone. Good to see all of you joining. And today we will talk about one of the most interesting topics in the East African region, but also globally, for a number of reasons that makes it interesting. But before I dive deeper into that, I just wanted to ask you to, if you have just joined, put your name in the chat box, tell us where you are calling from and the organization you are working for, and probably any other fact about you and or what you want us to know about you. And I would like to invite CL, if she's on the call, she'll just speak very briefly about this and the process we are going through. And then I will come back just to kickstart the session. I don't know, CL, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. I'm very sorry about that. I hope that everyone can hear me. My name is CL Vaughan and I work with Share Screen Africa. And we facilitate virtual events to bring experts into classrooms all over Africa. And just to highlight that fact, I'm actually speaking to you from a tent in the bush, which is why my connection is really awful. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. We are holding this series exploring East Africa's wildlife economy in conjunction with the African Wildlife Economies Institute. And I just wanted to say a really massive welcome to our audience today, and also thank you to our speakers, Dr. Mwambampa and Dr. Nyamoga, and thank you as well, our facilitator, Mr. Charles Karangwa, for donating their time and expertise to give us this talk. So thank you all. Charles, I'll hand over to you. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to this. Thank you.
Thank you, Sia. Today we'll talk about wild fuels. Mostly, we will focus on what you probably know most. If we talk about wild fuels, might be complicated, but let's simplify that and talk about firewood and charcoal, especially in East Africa. Now, let me give you a couple of facts here. East Africa's population growth rate today is estimated at 4.2%. That means that the current population in East Africa, which is estimated at close to 500 million plus, in the next 10 to 20 years will be close to more than 1 billion. Now, the current demand of consumption of firewood is increasing as the population increases for a couple of reasons. Number one, more than 65% of the population in East Africa use firewood or charcoal to cook. It's actually more than that. And I'm giving you very, 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 very lower numbers possible, but it's really more than that. And what does that mean? We have experienced in East Africa a significant change in forest. The deforestation and degradation, mostly driven by that high demand of charcoal and firewood, which is used both at household level, but also at industrial level, has driven loss of forest between the last 20 years. Some of the countries have lost more than 50% of their forest, including Uganda. But it's even worse, deforestation even get worse in Tanzania, but also in Kenya. Now, what does that mean? Should we just look at firewood and charcoal as a threat to biodiversity? Should we look at charcoal and firewood as a threat to climate change? or should we also look at the positive side of it from an economic engine which can drive economic growth, but also economic change within the region? So that's why this topic is important. What is the role of firewood and charcoal in the economy across the East African region? So I'm very privileged today to have very amazing speakers, so whom I'm going to introduce. And I wanted just to kindly remind you that you can send a question. So feel free to send a question in the chat box anytime. We'll go back to that, but also we will give you an opportunity after our speakers to ask questions. If you want to unmute yourself or speak live, please feel free to come in. You can also share your own experience. Now, our first speaker is Ms. Dr. Grayson Nyamoga. He's a senior lecturer at Sokoine University of Agriculture. And Grayson has been with university for more than about 15 years, teaching the Department of Forestry and Environmental Economics at the College of Forestry, Wildlife and Tourism in Sokoine University of Agriculture. And most of us know Sokoine as one of the top leading university in the topics of forest and agriculture across the region. His work focused mostly on forest economics, poverty analysis, natural resource management, and community-based natural resource management in Tanzania. He has got a PhD where he focused during his research on aspects on land use change, but also land use sustainability in Tanzania, and has quite other areas of research. And he will speak to us today about what is the current state of this topic in Eastern Africa region, and what are the core challenges both at practical level, but also at the policy level, and the opportunities that the topic can bring. So over to you, Dr. Grayson.
Oh, thank you so much, Chaz, for the introduction. And you posed a very good questions, saying that should we treat charcoal as a threat? That's a very, very good question. Maybe we will have the answers at the end of the discussions, and we'll hear from others as well. So we cannot separate charcoal production or firewood from the wildlife economy, because some people will be asking, we are talking about the wildlife economy, but why should we talk about charcoal and firewood? So those are the two entities which they interlink each other. Forestry and wildlife are very closely related. You cannot talk about wildlife without talking about forests. And the charcoal is produced from the forest, from the trees. In most East African countries, charcoal is produced either from the natural forestry or from the plantations. So is in Tanzania. We have charcoal from both the natural forestry and mainly miombo woodland, which in Kenya also the same, but also from the plantation. But very few charcoal in Tanzania comes from the plantation. Most is comes from the natural forest, which the miombo woodland, where most of the wildlife exists. So, but we also have charcoal from other alternative charcoal produced from either sawdust or grasses or other things, the briquettes, for instance. But we are worried about charcoal and firewood because, as you said, in most of the East African countries, charcoal is the most useful cooking energy. So in Tanzania, almost 80 to 90% of the population, they're using charcoal or firewood. I think in Kenya also the same, Uganda the same, Zambia, most of the SADC countries, they use charcoal and firewood for cooking, and that's the mostly used energy. So we need to talk about this because, as you said, we might treat it as a threat, but it's in some senses it's not. It's if you look the statistics in Tanzania, annually we use about 3 to 4 tons of charcoal. In Kenya, they say it's 1.6 to 2.4 million tons per year. In Zambia, the same, 2 to 3. In Zimbabwe, 1.2. Some statistics, they say 1.5 million tons per year. But to produce 1 ton of charcoal, you need a huge, a large amount of trees, because the conversion rate is we use a very poor technology. You need almost 4 to 12 tons to produce 1 ton of charcoal, depending on what type of kiln or technology you use. So you see, you consume charcoal, but to get charcoal, you have we have lost a huge amount of fuel wood before converting it into charcoal. 4 to 12 times is not a small amount. This because the technology we are using to produce charcoal, it's not so efficient, the kiln. Again, when you come in the consumption side, that's the supply side. So if you come to the consumption side, where the charcoal users, they are also using very inefficient stoves. So we need to think about that in both sides, in the production side and in the consumption side, in order to minimize the amount of charcoal or fuel wood where we use. Of course, there are technology which exist. We can produce charcoal sustainably, and we can increase the efficiency from the current 19-25% to about 50% of the efficiency. So your question about should we treat charcoal as a threat? I will say no, because this is a business and people have been doing this for quite some times. And it's a business like any other business, but we can do it sustainably. In Tanzania, for instance, charcoal is a very lucrative and huge business. Almost according to the World Bank, the World Bank produced a report and saying that it employs more than 2 million people in the entire value chain, because from the producers to the retailers, it employs a number of people in between, transporters, traders, and many others. So we cannot say that it is a threat. It is a threat if we do not do it sustainably, but if we do it, it can be produced sustainably, because we can use both the charcoal from the plantations and also sustainable charcoal from the Miombo woodland. There are some NGOs which are trying to educate people. In Tanzania, I know TFCG, they are doing very good job in trying to educate, to train charcoal producers on how to do that in a more sustainable manner. Produce charcoal, but still the Miombo woodland exists. Because most of the species in the Miombo regenerate, sprout. The coppicing, they have the high capacity to coppice. So you can cut the tree, produce charcoal, but still the forest can regenerate later if we do it in a more sustainable manner. In Tanzania, charcoal, the forest sector in general contribute about 3.3%. The current study says that it contributes 3.3% of the total GDP. So it's an opportunity for both employment, for income generation to the local communities, and because it's traded also internationally, so it's an opportunity to many people. The current contribution to the Tanzanian economy is about 4.7 trillion. The entire forest sector contributes about 4.7 trillion to the national GDP. But charcoal alone it's 2.06. That's almost half of the contribution in the national economy from the forest sector is contributed by charcoal. So you see, it's a huge, it's a very huge business. So if we invest in the proper technology for producing charcoal and also for using charcoal at the end, I'm sure it won't be a threat, but rather an opportunity. The same World Bank report in 2012, I think that was 2012, they found that the charcoal sector contribute almost 650 million US dollars in the economy. At that time, that amount of money was even more than what the coffee, the tea, and the cotton sector contributed to the national economy. So that's a huge amount of money. So we can do that and still conserve our forests, because we have to link both charcoal production, the tourism sector, and other things. But one of the things why we are not doing it properly is because most of the charcoal is traded illegally, is produced illegally, and is traded illegally because the charcoal sector is not formalized in most of the East African countries. It's now that Tanzania, for instance, the government is doing very good job in trying to formalize the charcoal sector, the entire value chain of the charcoal sector to be formalized. That's one way of making the charcoal and the fuel wood production in general sustainable. Because if you formalize it, then you are giving power to these to those individuals along the charcoal value chain. And if they are recognized, they know that we are doing this business legally. It's easy for them to do it sustainably. For instance, what the government of Tanzania was trying to do recently is to ensure that the charcoal producers, they are recognized, they are formalized, and then they form groups. So the government know where they are and how they are doing that charcoal production. In that way, it's easy to train these groups. It's easy to provide improved technology to them, and they can do that in a more sustainable manner. And recently, I think there is the government of Tanzania announced that they will soon start subsidizing gas slowly, so that at least the production of charcoal starts going down slow, and then later on we have a sustainable charcoal production. So with all these efforts, I will not say that charcoal production is a threat. Maybe if we have people from Tanzania here, they will agree with what I'm saying. Probably charcoal, yes, is causing some problems to is contributing to deforestation. But if you compare charcoal and agricultural activities, you may find that maybe the shift in cultivation is contributing even more to the deforestation than charcoal. So firewood and charcoal in the Tanzanian context is not that much a problem. I know in Rwanda also there are is not a threat because they are doing it in a sustainable manner. Same in Kenya. I know there are some companies which are training charcoal producers using advanced technology so that it's sustainable. And I'm sure in other countries are also doing the same. So if
Thank you so much.
If we formalize this sector and engage all stakeholders, the public and the private sector, or bring them together, I'm sure the sector will contribute to the economic growth rather than being a threat. Thank you so much, Charles. I think it will be a more of conversation, so I will
No,
maybe
thanks a
the
lot,
questions
Dr.
and yes,
Moga,
yes.
for that very good insights. And you really gave very inspiring talk here, but also very informative figures. No one could just underestimate the role of charcoal business generally to the contribution of the economy, creating jobs. Yeah, but again, we are talking about wildlife economy. We are talking about charcoal. We are talking about firewood. We are not actually doing this at the cost of other energy sources. We know that there are other existing energy sources. At the same time, looking at the numbers, you cannot close our eyes on these very important sources of energy, sources of economy, but also source of livelihoods for millions of people across East Africa region. I was looking at some statistics. In fact, if the use of gas, LPG, the liquefied petroleum gas is not subsidized, the population using it today would drop by 65%. That would mean that literally we are talking about more economic subsidy to this, so that we can have more people using the different other sources of energy. So I also saw a question from that. So we have another couple of minutes, and I want you, Dr. Nyamoga, to reflect on these particular questions. If this is an opportunity, what kind of regulation framework that needs to be in place so that it doesn't actually, we don't lose this much of tons of biomass through the process of producing charcoal. So I will come back to you in a minute. Now, let me go to my good friend, Dr. Tuyeni. And I want to do justice to you, and I would just say a few words about you before you come in. And Dr. Tuyeni is a scientist and have a lot of interest in socio-ecological dimensions, linking this with the natural resources use, and currently was as the science director at the Nature Conservancy. But the interesting part of her is that over the past 20 years, she has really focused her work on understanding the sustainability of charcoal in East Africa and Mexico, but also the narrative that favors or disfavor the conducive policy for managing the charcoal, what we call charcoal problem. So Dr. Tuyeni, I will bring you in to help us understand actually this narrative. I want you to break this what I call myth and misconception, to only look at charcoal as a problem. Can it be an opportunity? At what cost? Is it costing biodiversity? Is it costing economy? Is it costing nature? Over to you.
Great, thank you so much, Charles, for that and for the really interesting questions, and thank you, Dr. Grayson, for giving us that whole oversight of what the situation looks like in Tanzania. And what I wanted to also highlight is again, and I'm sure this group, there's been a lot of discussion about, wildlife is life only animals. And really, when I think of wildlife, I think of the plants and animals, insects, mammals, and so forth. So wild fuels or wildlife fuels does definitely include all the biomass that is extracted either as dry wood or green wood to fuel stoves all over East Africa and other parts of Africa. So I'll just share with you a brief presentation that gives an overview that zooms a little bit out of Tanzania into the East Africa zone and even into the global trade of charcoal, with a lot of it coming from the continent. So Grayson has already highlighted just how big and a lucrative of a business charcoal is. It fuels national economies, and it's just an incredibly intricate and efficient supply chain. Everywhere you go, and I've seen it in Mexico, I've seen it in different parts of Africa, it's just an incredibly efficient system run by millions of people, from the producers all the way to the retailers. And what I think is important to remember is that regardless of where you are in the world, people are using charcoal. And I like to think of it that, there's those of us who use it because it's a need, we have no other choice. And then there are those of us who use it as sort of a luxury, nice thing to have. And when you think of this, think of, your weekly or monthly barbecue, where you're consuming some amount of charcoal. So on the one extreme, you have the daily users. This is their primary energy, and this includes 60 to 90% of urban households in sub-Saharan Africa. Or you have those sort of middle to middle upper income households that are probably using charcoal just to cook the meals that require more heavy cooking, and they find gas or electricity too expensive for that. So for instance, think boiling beans or meat for long hours, you would use charcoal. So you'd still have your charcoal stove while you have your electric and gas stove. And then you move over to those of us who use it mostly just for grilling, for weekend barbecues. And it's a nice to have, and we prefer food that is, or meat or veggies, whatever they are, grilled with charcoal. This is like a preference. So however you look at it, in the end, you have charcoal not really going away, regardless of where you are along this gradient. Consequently, at a global level, charcoal is just moving. Every day there are shiploads of charcoal being taken from one place to another. And here's a beautiful paper that actually tries to capture this using the Faustat data, which means this is only capturing about 10 to 50% of the actual trade that's happening. And what you will notice is that a lot of charcoal is moving from tropical zones towards the north. It comes to the global. When you go more in country and you look, for instance, in Africa, where are the countries that produce most charcoal? That's the bigger the size of the circle, the more charcoal it produces. And it comes from really strange countries where you think, what? Ethiopia, Nigeria, where I think of it as a Sahel. Where does the charcoal come from, right? And then there's some countries where I think they have no forest, such as Namibia. It is one of the biggest exporter of charcoals to Europe. So there are surprises in there, which means that you really, really need to hone down to the country level and sometimes to the district level within countries to really understand charcoal, who's producing it, what it's coming from, and how sustainable it is. If you look at it more broadly, basically most wood for charcoal is sourced from natural forests. Just like Grayson said, that tends to be the situation almost everywhere. Although in some cases, like Namibia, it's coming from invasive species. Invasive species, and in fact, a lot of the charcoal from Namibia is even certified. Most producers are small-scale rural farmers, which make this a really interesting energy production or sector, because it's very rare that small-scale farmers get to control or be in charge of basically the energy needs of a country. A lot of it is informal. So if you look across all of the East African countries and even across all of sub-Saharan Africa, some countries only 1% of their production is legal. So there is something about charcoal that allows it to be in the illegal, informal sector, which also is something always worth looking at and trying to understand why do people not move into the formal sector, even when countries have formalities for doing so. And then this is really important. We tend to talk about charcoal as a deforestation and forest degradation contributor. Again, when you hone in, and some colleagues did a really incredible study on trying to understand wood fuel, where wood fuel is unsustainably sourced in the whole world. And it ends up that when you really take into account whether extracted biomass renews, gets a chance to regenerate, it's only 27 to 34% of the production that is unsustainable. It just happens to be that a lot of these unsustainability hotspots are in East, West, and Southern Africa. So it is a concern. It definitely should be a concern so there's value to that. I've seen a couple of questions that are asking, why aren't we moving to other energy sources? Why are we still talking about charcoal? Well, the reality is this, that even as households move into, get electricity into their homes, they do not use electricity to turn on a stove. They're using that to light a bulb, charge phones, have a TV on, etc. Even perhaps boil some water for tea, but they're not using it to do most of their cooking. When you look in East Africa, it's Tanzania and Kenya have the best access to clean cooking stoves or clean cooking fuels, cleaner fuels than firewood and charcoal. Most countries don't, and that's because there's a cost implied in the implement, the stove. There's a cost implied in buying your charcoal, your gas, for instance, at an amount that is, essentially it's a financial issue. And as Charles put very well, that it for people to move over to gas and other clean fuels, you usually have to subsidize it. But there's only so much that a government can subsidize before it becomes an economic situation can't get rid of. So we talk about the charcoal supply chain, and here are some of the actors in that chain. It looks really nice and linear and neat. It's nothing like that. In reality, there are thousands, hundreds and thousands of people across any supply chain. And so when we're talking about transitioning away from charcoal, we're also talking about what are these people going to be doing, right? So that's why the focus around charcoal is really about how can we make the wood production much more sustainable so that the rest of the value chain can continue, people can continue having their jobs, but we're really sure that the wood is coming, where the wood is coming from is sustainable. There is something about charcoal that always can get to the market. All these people contribute in making sure that every day a household has charcoal to turn their stoves on and do their cooking, and that's not just incredible to think about the efficiency of the system, but also what it would mean to move to another fuel if you were to dismantle this system. And it also explains why, even as countries put bans and put policies in place trying to curb charcoal use, the markets, this supply chain figures out a way to get around it. The importance of charcoal goes beyond sort of, or rather the value of charcoal is so big, and Grayson talked about the figures for Tanzania, but it has been used by terrorism groups to fund wars, both in Somalia, for instance, in the DRC, in South Sudan, for instance. So that just gives you an indication of, again, the value of this this product. And in fact, it's often referred to as black gold. And this beautiful study, you should have a look at it if you can, that looks at just how charcoal moves within the East African region between Kenya, Uganda, and South Sudan. And it's quite fascinating. And gives you again an opportunity to see where are the spots where you could enter and really start moving it towards a sustainable production system without upending and getting rid of the good things that work in this in this system. And of course, getting rid of the violence. There's a lot of violence and power dynamics in the supply chain, and lots of injustice and criminality that are also issues that come along with this trade, especially in crisis areas and in war zones. Regionally, charcoal moves, like I said, smoothly, illegally, but smoothly across incredible distances. So here's just an example of how charcoal moves into Kenya, feeding the Nairobi and Mombasa households, and quite a lot flowing in from Uganda, but also quite a bit internally. Here is what the Ugandan case looks like, also incredibly coming from 300, 500, sometimes even 700 kilometers away across borders. And the big question is, and everybody's asking it in the chat, and that's what I hope we really talk about, is does sustainable production exist, in what form, how, and how to go about it. So thank you so much, and I'm looking forward to responding to questions and having this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Tuyeni, for the very informative presentation. Yeah, I want just to summarize what you did, because I mean that was a super informative presentation, and we are talking about the wildlife economy in East Africa, and you can see that we cannot just close our eyes on this particular topic. I think it's just impossible, especially when you start talking about the small-scale economies of charcoal, a sector that is in East Africa alone, creating and employing jobs of more than 12 million people. And this just across the 7 countries, but at the same time is driving a very big interest from economic point of view. Now, there's a whole efforts, and I want to come back to Grace and before we open to the audience. There's a whole process of stopping the charcoal, from conservationists and what we call a very old school ecologists. They think charcoal can only drive to deforestation. But at the same time, you talked about a lot of research, groundbreaking research, which are showing that we can reduce inefficiencies in the value chain and increase the economic growth using this if we move into sustainable management. I want to come back to nature-based solutions. In fact, I sometimes think that I'm not saying that charcoal is nature-based solution. What I'm saying is that forest management includes actually sustainable use and management of resources. And now the question now is, we are losing significantly our forest. And Alex from BCGI asked a very good question. What actually is driving people to go more to Miombo than going to plantations? Why can't we invest in plantation and stop just invading this beautiful natural forest? But at the same time, we need to reflect on what is the role of wild species in contributing this whole discussion. So my question then back to you, Dr. Nyamoga, is can you reflect on this? What do we need from a policy regulatory framework to really transition to unsustainable to sustainable charcoal business? And you could probably take case of Tanzania, but also if you could speak about other countries. And I'll also come back to Dr. Tuyeni about another questions on how do we actually start linking investment, private investments, and attracting really investments into this, because when we see that 80% of people involved into this sector are working informally, how do we actually move this to become an investment opportunity, and probably that could reduce significantly the losses. So policy regulations for Grayson and investment, back to Ian.
Okay, yeah, thank you so much, Charles. I was saying that it's true for the all ecologists will say that charcoal production is not good to the ecology. But as you said, there is no way we can avoid that, because most of these countries we have seen 90% they are using charcoal. So we need to produce it. But how do we do it? That's the question. Now you ask why do people go to the natural species, not the plantations? The one thing, the quality of charcoal. There are some species in the Miombo woodland which produce very high quality charcoal. That's why the producers, they go, because the market prefer that good quality charcoal. The calorific value, there is what we call the calorific value. When you burn charcoal, the energy that cooks the food. So that the charcoal from the Miombo woodland, you use a little charcoal, you cook large amount of food. But most of the plantation species, they have low calorific value. Not all, but some. There is a species, there's a charcoal from the what we call the Acacia meansi from the southern highland in Tanzania. It produces a very good charcoal, but then that's why you see in the southern highland, people are now moving towards the planting Acacia meansi for charcoal production, because it grows faster than they can harvest and do other things. But there's no research if the Acacia meansi can also grow very fast in along the Miombo area. Probably it can, but we haven't done much research on that. But I agree that we need to invest more on this plantation charcoal than the natural forest charcoal. TFCG are doing one thing to ensure that we have sustainable charcoal production. I said most of the Miombo woodland can sprout, can coppice. When you cut it, it produces other branches, because not everyone is a forester here. Coppicing is re-sprouting. So most of the Miombo woodland, they have that capacity. When you cut, it can re-sprout again. So we can, that's why it's possible to do sustainable charcoal production, because of that nature of the Miombo woodland. If it was not sprouting or coppicing, then it could be a problem. Once you cut it, it dry forever, but not from the Miombo woodland. They can regenerate.
Grayson, I'm trying to push you to move to more of regulation and policy.
I'm coming to that. I'm coming to that.
Yeah.
One of why it's not sustainable, because the way we are, the way we are pricing charcoal now is the government is waiting for the charcoal to get the royalty at the market. They don't care where the charcoal is coming from, right? So whether you produce it efficiently or not, it doesn't matter. What matters, what you bring the market, then they charge you per bag. So we think in one of the study, it was suggested that maybe we start charging the charcoal traders or producers from where they produce, so that they can use maybe we charge per volume harvested. By doing so, they can use the trees they cut so efficiently, or they can think of innovating better technology to ensure that from the little amount of tree they cut, they produce more charcoal. But for now, the way we are pricing charcoal, it's a reverse. We are only charging at the market, but we don't charge at and most of the land in Tanzania is free. So anyone can go and cut anywhere without being even asked. So it's a problem of land ownership or in regime ownership. And then we come to the market policies. Maybe we start from the pricing of the charcoal and yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
I think we can come back to that, and there's a couple of questions. And Dr. Tuyeni, we talk about how do we turn the curve, right? Instead of doing charcoal to drive biodiversity loss and deforestation, and which is going to we're gonna regret that later, because it's gonna make the case of climate change worse. We're gonna face more floods, and we will lose ecosystem services. But how can we bend the curve and still make this sector productive economically, at the same time contribute to sustainable management of our ecosystems?
Charles, yeah, thank you. So yeah,
is it even possible,
example,
Dr. Tuyeni?
Yes, it is. I believe. Yes, it is. I've seen some incredible examples, and they're based on that very simple fact that Miombo woodland and the trees in Miombo is mostly coppice. I think you cannot underestimate that. And so some of the most beautiful examples I've seen are those that really take advantage of the coppicing aspect, and they focus the production on a very limited area in which the coppicing is managed. And so you're consistently extracting and are able to extract, and it's selective logging just of those individuals that meet the biomass or the size that you need. Well managed and enforced. I know there's people talking about enforcement in the chat. And so you're having a rotation, you're treating it like a plantation, but it's actually a natural forest, because then you're meeting the needs of the market, of it being Miombo type, of this high calorific value. But you're also reducing the cost of what a plantation implies, which means planting a tree and so forth. It's just a huge cost, especially for communities. And thing to aim for and achieve. So it's one way of sort of working with the system, harnessing what is working and what works well in nature, but then putting in these implements or thinking of it more in an economic and efficient way. Another great example that I've seen up in Uganda with Kijani Forestry, the way they're working is they're actually going into these areas that have been deforested from charcoal. And they're then working with farmers in what is called farmer managed regeneration. So they're helping those coppices regenerate. And then they're working with the charcoal producer so that they're harvesting that biomass, but without having to cut the whole tree. You can cut branches. You don't have to chop the whole tree down. And then those are being produced in what they call a Casamane kiln, which is actually can be a lot more efficient. And that charcoal is entering the market as well at the same price as all other charcoal. So there are great examples out there. And in fact, they're also using the carbon market as a way to finance that. And so there are innovative ways. I think we have to think outside. Finance business hat on and think, how can this be a business that can go on and on, a sustainable business that fulfills a lot of the environment sustainability check boxes as well.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tuyeni. We have really quite a lot of good questions on the chat, and we can go through each of them, but it's really more of one of the participants asking about, think about the future in the next 20 years. What would sustainable charcoal production look like? Can we start growing, investing in plantations that also provide additional multiple benefits to biodiversity and generate also other ecosystem services beyond just charcoal production? So there's probably more questions, and I have another 9 minutes as well. I will give each of you a kind of 2 minutes at the end, but if there is one of the participants who want to come in please raise your hand. We will unmute you, and you can ask your questions. And we appreciate all your contributions in the chat box about the Myombo and how we could actually start looking at that particular questions. So there's a lot of science here, right? We cannot ignore the role of science in understanding the forest and ecology in making some of these solutions workable in the long term. There's a lot of investments in bringing really high technology solutions that can help us to produce efficient charcoal. I think it's true that some of the wild species can produce very high calorific value charcoal, but also it really depends very much on what technologies we are using to even increase the efficiency of planted forest charcoal production systems. So we do have a couple of questions, and maybe at the end you can reflect on that. One is really why native species not mentioned in these examples? Is it lack of research? Or like on things like calorific value, etc. So if you could really reflect that from scientific but also research point of view, where do we need to put a lot of efforts, Grayson, going forward? Because that's why we are having this dialogue. We are looking at areas of investments in terms of research and policy, but also maybe if you could reflect on this to end about overall, what is really the landscape? How do we really work within an ecosystem of sustainable charcoal production? What are the bottlenecks, but also what are the areas that we need to continue focusing on if you want to move this economy to a certain level? So I would give you a couple of minutes each, and then if we don't have one person who raised the hand, we will start moving towards closing the webinar. And I'm glad to see some of the very familiar names and faces in the webinar today. So over to you, Dr. Tuyeni, and then we go back to Grayson to reflect on these final remarks and questions.
Thank you, Charles. So this is the way I see it, right? In terms of the science needed, the knowledge gap, so to speak. For the longest time, I think we're trying to understand, how much is it deforestation or degradation? How much degradation? How much charcoal? How much wood goes into making a ton of charcoal? There's a little bit on, what the impacts are on biodiversity beyond the actual wood, the whole forest system and the animals and additional plants in there. I think there just hasn't been enough. The bottlenecks are more in understanding people. So what we need more is behavioral scientists who help us understand things like, what does it take to switch from one fuel feed to another, from an inefficient stove to a more efficient stove? Is it just economic? Clearly it isn't, because even when wood stoves are sometimes given for free, you go back and visit and people have stopped using them. So what's going on? I think we just haven't put enough attention in understanding the more nuanced aspects of this whole supply chain, use, consumption, production. Then the other part is probably more, at least from my point of view, more related to in the production side, what does it take for governments to give more, how should I put it, to give more attention to the production and making it sustainable rather than the banning. So a lot of governments have been reactionary. They keep banning charcoal. It enters the underground market or and this has repeated itself over and over again in the last 20, 30 years. It hasn't worked. There's definitely research showing that, but it's a constant go-to plan as a policy instrument, which seems strange. And what is it that's going on in the minds of decision makers that keep coming back to it? Because it disrupts the system, and it doesn't address the need for sustainable production. And I think the sustainable production can, with community management and private investment, you can sort of do it well without government interference. Government just has to provide the policies and the environment, the conducive environment, to be able to operate efficiently in the system.
Thank you. Thank you. Grace, and in 1 minute, 2 minutes max, if what would be your, where do we continue working, how to improve this particular sector of charcoal firewood production in a sustainable way? Your closing.
Okay, I think Tuyeni mentioned some good things, but I will also add on investing in technology, trying to innovate and research on technology which are best in producing charcoal to increase efficiency, because the current, especially the kiln used for charcoal production, how do we improve the efficiency in order to minimize the amount of wood we harvest? But also increasing government investment in the consumption side, the improved cooking stoves, but also subsidizing other clean energies. As I said earlier, I think the government of Tanzania mentioned a few weeks ago about that, and if they do that, we will get there. This is a war we have to fight from all angles, not only using one weapon, but we use all the weapons. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for that. I have one person who raised the hand. If you can speak in 1 minute, Evaristo, please go ahead.
That I would like to know that if there are any legal production system of charcoal in Tanzania, because we heard from the presenter that more than half of the GDP which is developed is contributed by charcoal. So we would like to know if there is a legal charcoal production system in Tanzania. Thank you.
Thank you. The question was really on if there's a legal system, a regulatory framework in Tanzania that exists already to regulate charcoal production. Maybe in 30 seconds, Grace.
Yeah, there is. The government is doing much. There is already a charcoal production strategy, so it's there. I think we are heading to the policy, the charcoal use policy will also be there. So I think the legal aspects are being taken into account, and soon I think everything will be legalized. And I said about formalizing the entire value chain of the charcoal. So it's
thank you.
It's there.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, I want to take this moment to thank you all. We have had very good stuff from our panelists, very knowledgeable people in the sector. You have made a strong contribution from the chat box. We take note of all your contribution. I really like a couple of examples of what's happening in Zambia in terms of making this production more sustainable and etc. But also other examples and the reality that we need to really face. A couple of key takeaway from myself. We cannot close our eyes on this sector, which actually generate and contribute to GDP, but also creates millions of jobs in East Africa region. At the same time, we cannot underestimate the role of unsustainable charcoal and firewood production to drive or make worse the loss of our beautiful forest and impact negatively on biodiversity, which again comes back to the climate change. At the same time, we have opportunities to turn this narrative down. We can sustainably produce firewood and charcoal and equally contribute to the economy. We need investors, we need technologies, we need financial mechanism that can allow that to happen. At the same time, we need government to put in place regulatory mechanisms, very clear policy, including clear land use and clear land ownership plans. With this, I want to thank you all for your participation. I want to really encourage you to continue look at the website of the Africa Wildlife Economy Institute. This series of dialogue is going to continue, and we look forward to have you in the future webinar. Thank you again to my panelists and the background team which organized this webinar.
Thank you so much, Charles.
Thank you, Charles. Thank you, everyone.